In the organization, we need to create an environment of psychological safety.
A kind of psychological safety shelter.
Here, a person becomes irritable and sarcastic. You need to schedule a one-on-one with the person and ask, how are you?
Communication, well, that's always been a problem, still is, and I think it will continue to be.
What works against us? It's when a manager says, you're not supposed to think, there was no order. I think here, you are here to execute. That's outright bullying and mobbing. But people think it's just friendly humor.
Everyone has psychological trauma.
Colleagues, may I ask you an unethical question? Have you ever had experience seeing a psychologist or psychotherapist?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Boards of Directors with Sergiy Bulavin channel. Today we continue our conversation with our guest experts about the impact of stress and the mental health of an organization. In the first part, we discussed the Bright Minds Matrix. And Oksana, please remind us what each letter of this acronym stands for.
So, B stands for blood flow, monitoring blood pressure to ensure the brain receives enough oxygen. The second is retirement, meaning that when our brain stops learning, it starts to deteriorate. That's why we need to challenge it with engaging tasks. I stands for inflammation. If there is a source of inflammation in the body, it affects brain function. As well, G stands for genetics. If there is a family history of mental disorders, that should be an important signal for us, and we need to be more attentive to ourselves. H is head trauma. If we've had head injuries, we also need to take care of that. First and foremost, T stands for toxins. These are psychoactive substances, such as alcohol, mold, and carbon monoxide. All of these affect brain health. Bright completed. Minds, M stands for mind storms, abnormal electrical activity in the temporal part. This includes the onset of various types of headaches, and it's important to seek medical attention and investigate the cause. I stands for immunity and infections, the immune system, taking care of it, vitamins, they are essential for brain health and to effectively fight off various infections. N stands for neurohormonal disorders. We need to monitor how our thyroid gland is functioning, as well as all other hormones, and whether they are in balance. D stands for diabesity. We need to check whether we are somewhere in a pre-diabetic state, whether we have insulin spikes and crashes, and also whether excess weight is not a pathological reaction of our body. And S stands for sleep. Sleep no less than 6 hours, because otherwise the brain doesn't have time to cleanse itself.
For some, even 5 is possible, right?
Let's not leave that window of possibility open for people. Still, aim for at least 6 hours.
All right. Oksana, basically, it's clear how this works on an individual level. And of course, every person should reflect on these things for their mental health and monitor them and try to do better for their mental well-being. But how can this be taken into account at the organizational level, at level of management, top management, at the level of the board and the entire company?
How can this be considered for your organization? I'll suggest a different acronym for you. First and foremost, in an organization, we need to create an environment of psychological safety. No, this isn't about everyone being nice, smiling, and letting people do whatever they want. It's about creating an organizational culture, not just an atmosphere within the company. Culture and atmosphere are different things, and in this culture, we focus on finding solutions, not placing blame. Where we have certain management routines in place, for example, people regularly and consistently receive feedback about their activities and also clearly receive detailed information about what is expected of them. This process gives people a sense that they know what to expect, and thanks to this, they feel more secure and confident in their roles. In an environment that provides this psychological safety, they experience less stress.
It's a kind of psychological shelter in a way, psychologically.
You could say that. But here, an important point is that this doesn't mean we should create a warm bath environment in the organization. It means that we challenge people, throw challenges at them, assign them complex tasks. But this can be done in a way that increases stress levels, or it can be done in a way that creates constructive challenges, and people will learn to handle them in their everyday routine, to work with them.
And who is supposed to do this? Because, of course, these topics are very closely related to HR. On the other hand, it's clear that without the CEO, without functional leaders, it won't work.
There's a saying, don't try to teach your children, they'll end up being like you anyway. At the organizational level, this means how the CEO communicates with their first line. That's how they communicate with middle managers, and in turn, how those managers communicate with line managers. And accordingly, that same style of communication reaches the frontline employees. That's why it all starts with the CEO.
And if we bring in the board, can we take a step above the CEO?
Of course.
Would you say that the way the board works with the CEO will, in the same way, be passed down within the organization?
Absolutely. It just can't happen, unfortunately, on its own. We, as the board, communicate properly with the CEO, so we hope that everything will cascade down from there, that it will follow the right behavioral models. No, this needs to be clearly defined, and it needs to be monitored in a certain way. Speaking of psychological safety, as I promised, we'll introduce another acronym, and the new acronym is SCARF. Again, it's in English. The author of this acronym is David Rock. David Rock is not a researcher or scientist himself. I really appreciate specialists like him because they are science popularizers. If you've ever tried to read a 300-page research paper and grasp the main idea, it's very difficult. David Rock did that for us. What is this SCARF about? SCARF is, let's even call it, a modern theory of motivation. It belongs to the 21st century, and in psychology, anything less than 50 years old is considered brand new. And it became possible to form this acronym when we were able to look into the working brain. Previously, this was only possible post-mortem, but now you can put in a live person into an MRI machine and observe how the brain functions. And this acronym refers to the subconscious needs of the human brain when a person is in the context of interacting with other people. So, is Maslow no longer relevant? He is still relevant. It's just that Maslow spoke about human needs in general, just basic needs. But here, we're talking about the needs of the human brain when we are in the context of interacting with others. Letter S is for status. It's very important for each of us to feel that I am no less important than others, that I'm not being belittled. What works against this? Larissa Nikolaevna, oh Lord, your ideas. They cost 150 million. No one's going to give us that kind of money. Someone else has better ideas. What I did there to Larissa Nikolaevna, I stepped on her need for status. Status isn't about putting a crown on my head and walking around saying, oh God, how lucky we are that you work with us.
So it's essentially about recognition.
Exactly. Or at the very least, not being demeaned. Because when people tell me, oh, we have so much friendly humor in our organization, and then I come in, either conducting an interview or leading a training, and I hear, listen, people are mocking each other. That's outright bullying and mobbing, plain and simple. But people think it's just friendly humor. Friendly humor is when everyone is having fun. That is, at the very least. No one is being belittled, at the very least. Nothing negative. What else can have a negative effect is when we engage in micromanagement. That means we tell the person, all right, here's how you're going to do it. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Even though the person is a good expert and specialist, we're belittling them, sending the message that we don't believe they know how to do it. That's what has a negative effect. The next C stands for certainty. Certainty. So where do we get that certainty, you might ask? Certainty is about our need. Our need is to understand what awaits us in 3 days, in a month, in 6 months, what's around the corner. And the point isn't to achieve maximum certainty, but to increase the level of that certainty. For example, when communication starts from the top, the company's strategy, this means that this is our priority, this comes second, and this is not a priority at all for this year. Employees gain a certain level of certainty. Among my tasks, if I have 1, 2, 3 things to do at the same time, I know which one to prioritize. So for me, that brings more clarity. And here's another example of clarity, a very simple example. A line manager scheduled a 60-minute meeting and realizes that there are 90 minutes worth of issues to cover. So it's not okay to say at the end of the meeting, we're staying because there are still questions. You need to say at the beginning, colleagues, I blocked 60 minutes in your calendars, but we'll be here for 90. Because people will be dissatisfied. Yes, but only at the beginning. At the same time, you immediately gave them clarity, so our task is to provide as much clarity as we can. If it comes from above, well, for the board decides. But this, for example, is an instruction for action for middle managers. If you've only been given a portion of information about the strategy, then you should say, colleagues, I'm sharing what I have. The next portion, regarding our transformation, is promised in about a month. So at our next monthly general meeting, I will bring you the next portion of information. People calm down a bit. They told us everything they knew. Of course it's scary, but they even told us when the next portion of information will come. We move forward. Letter A relates to autonomy. What is autonomy? No, it's not from the series, I want to be a cat that walks by itself. Autonomy is about the following. Do my efforts make a difference? Let me give you an example. When we say, here's the bonus system in the organization, and it's so complicated that you'd break your brain trying to figure it out, that means people don't understand what they need to do to get that bonus. And when a manager sits down with each of their direct reports, And those managers, in turn, sit down with each of their team members and explain, look, here's how it works. This is how the new bonus system operates. All right, what questions do you have? Okay, let's take a look at which actions you need to do more of to earn the bonus and which ones less. So when we break down this bonus system and make it clear, people understand, my future depends on me. An example of how this autonomy works. I'm sure you've seen the movie, or at least know of it, starring George Clooney, Up in the Air, the one where the main character traveled across the US firing employees from different companies. And when the character played by George Clooney informed an employee at some company that the company no longer required their services, he would, for example, say a pompous phrase like, anyone who ever built an empire sat where you are now. The first question people usually asked was, is there anything I could do differently? Is there something I can change so I won't be fired? This is a question about autonomy. Has everything already been decided? Or can I somehow influence my own fate? What works against this? It's when a manager says, you weren't supposed to think, there was no such order. I think here you just follow orders. That means very little depends on you. Of course, this somewhat overlaps with status, but here we're giving a direct message that very little depends on you.
Probably it's a poorly designed KPI system. When KPIs are set for an employee that the employee has no influence over, it turns into a system of demotivation rather than motivation.
Absolutely. I like to give an example. I don't know much about football, but I use this example everywhere. It's like when we set a KPI for the goalkeeper, your KPI is also the number of goals scored against the opponent. Well, theoretically, he could kick the ball through the field, but the chances of him actually scoring that are very slim. Let's move on. R. R stands for relatedness. Humans are social beings, and it's very important for us to understand, is the person next to us a friend or an enemy? Can I turn my back on this person? And this relatedness means it's important for me to feel that we're in this together, that we are people who support each other, not every man for himself. And what works in favor is when, here's a very simple example. A manager uses the pronoun we, a bad example. I witnessed a meeting where the manager said, I was just at a meeting with upper management and I was very ashamed of your results. Great, right? Success is shared, but poor results? No, those are yours. And that divides people. What else works against you? It's when a manager has a habit of talking about people behind their backs. Gossiping, divide and conquer. Yes. Gossiping, divide and conquer. Sowing discord among employees, especially when meetings aren't being held. Is that possible? Yes, at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, among clients. I encounter situations where managers say, this happens less often at higher levels and more frequently at the level of line managers. That already means it is being tolerated. His manager and his manager's manager. Oh, well, people are so exhausted. How can I still evaluate them? I meet with each person individually. Do you know what happens when you meet with each employee individually? It feels like I'm tearing myself apart. It's so hard for me, while others are doing less. So it creates division among people. When you hold a meeting, people see, I'm not the only one with a full plate of tasks. And my colleague too. Wow, they also have problems and they're managing them. So this sense of connection needs to be supported by something, some context, some meetings. And it's not just about the connection between employees at the task level. This also needs to be a sense of connection through informal communication. And that doesn't mean you necessarily have to go out for a beer. But it does mean that employees should be given the opportunity to talk about what each person is going through, so they can feel, I'm not the only one who's struggling like this. That means I'm normal.
And it's a very interesting effect because you might have thought that with remote work, the stress and the current situation, some managers are opting out of team-wide meetings and instead working individually, with each of them individually. In fact, I'm now seeing another potential problem, the one where managers stop holding one-on-one meetings and only operate at the team level. And one-on-ones are completely dropped.
One-on-ones affect this need for autonomy. Does anything actually depend on me? And what if I don't understand my KPIs? And how does the manager evaluate my work? I want to know that so I can do things better and differently. In general meetings, or I love it when managers say, my door is always open, anyone who wants to can come in. Hey, a person usually comes in and asks when they have a question about a task, but they don't come in and say, dear manager, please provide me with structured feedback. That just doesn't happen. That's why one-on-ones are also not just a nice to have or would be good to have. It is a must. And moving on, the final letter F stands for fairness. It's the human brain's need to believe that the agreements made here are being upheld. That if something is not allowed for me, then it's not allowed for others either. If I'm punished for a mistake or wrongdoing, then others are punished too. In other words, I see that things are happening fairly here.
The same rules of the game for everyone.
Exactly. That there are no equals who are more equal than others. And another very interesting aspect that was important to me, which I learned about. When we smell something extremely unpleasant, like the scent of rotting flesh, for example, the insular cortex or insula in our brain gets activated. When we experience injustice, this insular cortex lights up like a garland. Can you imagine that? When we feel injustice, it disgusts us just as much as when we smell a sewage truck. Let's think this through. As leaders, we need to understand these needs of the human brain and consider which of our actions have a positive effect and which have a negative one. What should I avoid doing as a leader to prevent creating a sense that this place is scary or unsafe? And what happens if we don't provide this psychological safety? The following happens. People come to work as if they're going to war, and they don't focus on realizing their full potential, on doing their tasks as well as possible, or on offering creative solutions. They come here as if to a gathering of wild tigers, and that means they're operating in self-preservation mode. I need to make sure I don't get eaten. What kind of creativity can there be? In other words, people just start defending themselves. It's the same scenario. Fight or flight. I came here to fight back, not to fully immerse myself in my track. It's turning into poetry. Listen to that.
Exactly. Absolutely no creativity, no initiative, and no supportive attitude toward colleagues.
Absolutely.
All of them. Well, not all, but most of the points of this SCARF model, it's all about quality communication. And this is such a lifelong topic. I don't know, since the 60s maybe, I don't know when exactly it started being used. In operational work, I can't even count how many communication trainings there have been. I, so to speak, came in and the problem was always there, right? Everyone goes through them, everyone listens, everyone agrees. If you ask what the biggest problems are, everything's correct, they'll write it all down. Lack of communication, we don't understand where we're heading. Then after all that, we go out, and in most cases, it doesn't work. And this is probably the only, in my experience, the only topic that doesn't work in the long run. With other things, there's some correlation, people do more and more facts come out later. But with communication, well, it was a problem. It still is. And I think it will continue to be. Because it's an age-old issue.
It's an age-old issue.
A leader, at the very least, has to recognize their own communication problem. It's like admitting you're an alcoholic. Exactly the same. Yes. No, it really is. Then you have to change yourself. It's good if there's a board, and the board notices it and helps, or if there's a CEO who helps their subordinates. But in most cases, unfortunately, it's not very effective.
I'd like to add now that truly, no matter what team or group you look at, if the team starts listing potential needs or problems, the first thing that will be mentioned is a problem with the communication or insufficient communication. Many managers, when they see this list, think, okay, I encounter this problem, so let's cross everything out. It's a problem that's always there. It always remains. How can we make it so that this problem no longer exists, including taking into account this abbreviation that we've just decoded?
If I may, let me respond here. Dmytro, what is it that I disagree with you on? You said that the longer abbreviation is about communication. Regarding all the letters, it's about communication absolutely everywhere. What should we do about it? Adults understand that they need to communicate with their subordinates. I have a colleague who says, a person who knows, who understands and is capable, and who actually does, unfortunately, that's three different people. Point 1, teach people. Point 2, monitor how they do it. Point 3, help within the organization so that it becomes a part of their daily activities. What does that mean? In our company, we say that your organization should have what we call a LOM. What is a LOM? No, it's not what they use to break things. LOM stands for Leader Operational Model, the operational model of a leader. These are the leader's routines. Routines is a good word. By routines, we mean recurring activities that take place. Some of them weekly, some monthly, some happen every 6 months, and they need to have a structure. For example, how often should you have one-on-ones with an employee? There's no one-size-fits-all answer. When you assign a task, you might meet with each team member weekly to clarify individual tasks. My question now is about structured feedback. When I, as a manager, share my general observations, not about each specific task, but when I try to identify certain patterns. Look, here's what I noticed during this period. Now we're going to talk about the period. It's that your performance has improved in some areas, but I also see that you're doing less in others. That's what I mean. And I believe this is something important for you to focus on. We call this feedback, for example, based on competencies. Personally, I believe that such a meeting should take place once a quarter. At work, people say, we do this every 6 months. That's already often. No, that's not often. Thank God, at least it's every 6 months, not just before bonuses payment.
Oh, that's performance evaluation. That's an assessment.
Sometimes it gets overly formalized. This is the kind of meeting where I ask, do you have such regular meetings? Yes, yearly. And how long does it last? 10 minutes. First of all, in the 21st century, feedback is a dialogue. The concept of shut your mouth, feedback as a gift, or now I'm going to talk at you. That's very old school. It's been outdated for a long time. And if you have Gen Z employees, those born after 1990, 1995, they won't stay. They'll leave the organization. It's a dialogue, first of all. Secondly, such a meeting should last 45, 60 minutes. You need to prepare for it. So then, how do you support it? You need to develop a template for how to conduct it, so that the manager doesn't have to think every time, oh God, I've got these quarterly meetings now. So what am I supposed to talk to them about for 60 minutes? There's simply a list of questions, and I follow that plan. And by the way, the employee should be speaking 70% of the time, not me as the manager. And when we provide these kinds of support tools to managers, they get the help they need, and it's more likely they'll actually do it. It gets maximized.
Oksana, a question about holding meetings once a quarter. Should we be doing them more often, especially nowadays when people are changing significantly and rapidly under the influence of external factors, among other things? Does it make sense to hold them once a month or even once a week?
Your question really pleases me. It really pains me when people say, oh, once a quarter? That's so often. So here, you need to base it on your own needs. If you have people who are in the process of onboarding into a position, you need to have such meetings with them every 2 weeks. If someone has been transferred from one position to another, we also talk about a tighter schedule for such meetings, once a quarter. This doesn't mean that outside of that quarterly meeting, we don't provide any feedback. There is also transactional feedback, task-specific, done or not done. And listen, stop. Here I see some shortcomings in this task. No one has cancelled that kind of feedback. So it should be provided no less than once every 2 weeks.
Or on the contrary, positive feedback?
I really appreciate your questions, because positive feedback is also necessary. Not only when mistakes happen, but also when something is done right. So here, everyone proceeds based on their own needs. Once a quarter, this refers to a structured meeting where we talk about you, dear subordinate. An hour of undivided attention. I'm dedicating it entirely to you. And we talk about your competencies, your individual development plan, and what you should focus on in the next quarter. Do more of this and less of that. This, for example. Look, I noticed there's a recurring mistake. That means something isn't working systematically. Let's take a look at what the causes might be. So, to summarize my answer, it can happen more frequently. The main thing is that it shouldn't be less frequent than once a quarter. For one-to-ones, they should be, especially when we're going through such turbulent times.
Now let's talk about this. We've covered the theoretical part, we've discussed SCARF, but diagnostics. Is it necessary to do it? What should be done to diagnostics? There can be tools for diagnostics. What should we pay attention to? And then we'll move on to the tools. What tools can be used in a company by managers to enhance resilience?
I would like to, if I may add to Dmytro's question, do we even need diagnostics at all? Because right now we understand the current state of all of us, our teams, our groups, and we might have a hypothesis that would most likely to clearly reflect reality. The damage and psychological trauma are present in everyone, and we need to start from that in order to build a system that will reduce their impact and correct the situation.
I'll start, as always, with a metaphor, an example, an anecdote. But this isn't an anecdote. It's a harsh truth, real life. It's commonly believed that women are more emotional than men. And when women come in saying, oh, I think my heart hurts, it's usually dismissed as, oh, it's just a high level of stress. And more women than men suffer because they don't receive help when they're on the verge of a heart attack. Because it's assumed that women are just sensitive, and it's just their nerves. But in reality, diagnostics should have been done. So if there's an opportunity, diagnostics should be carried out. What tools are available? Employee engagement surveys. This is an HR-related tool. At the same time, it provides a snapshot across the entire organization and within teams, if used correctly. And it will show which aspect is falling behind. Whether it's the communication from the direct manager, or the lack of information about where we're heading, what our future as a company looks like, or whether it's about whether I know how to perform my tasks at my workplace, or if I see any prospects here. Not necessarily up the career ladder. It could be horizontal development or professional growth. My development as an expert. So, a survey on employee engagement. There will be something to bring to the table. Okay, that's one. Another tool we can use is, for example, performance metrics analysis. If the department used to perform at a certain level, and now it's achieving lower results, with the same number of people, no staff changes, and the tasks remaining the same, then we need to look deeper into what's affecting these metrics. So we can look at dashboards.
It could really be some economic reasons, or it could be the psychological state of the employees.
Yes.
So we need to analyze this.
By default, we can assume that the psychological state has an impact. What else? This is no longer about research, but rather what direct managers should be monitoring is the level of increase, in conflict potential within the team. This is when the number of non-constructive conflicts increases. By the way, conflict is an absolutely neutral phenomenon. The question is how we deal with it. Because sometimes conflict is necessary, as is a heated discussion. A sharp exchange is needed in order to voice that there is a problem and that we are working to solve it. What is a non-constructive conflict? That's when people start attacking each other, when sarcastic, bitter comments appear that weren't present in the team before. In other words, as a manager, I start noticing unusual behavior. And these are also signals. You don't even need research to see that something is wrong. And what should be done about it? That's the question. When a person starts showing behavior that's uncharacteristic for them, someone who was always easy to negotiate with, now becomes snappy and sarcastic, then it's time to schedule a one-on-one with them. That is, don't immediately jump into giving feedback like, look, when you behave like that in a meeting, it affects everyone. It impacts performance. That should be the second part. The first part is, how are you, what are you doing?
A one-to-one, outside of the scheduled meetings.
Outside of that framework, yes, outside the operational model of a manager, in order to understand what's really going on. Because maybe the person isn't necessarily dealing with something personal. Maybe they're just fed up that our process isn't written for this kind of situation. And we don't know about it because it somehow used to work, because the person used to have moments of inspiration and, thanks to their personal qualities, was able to find common ground and ask people to do things. But now, when we are in a mode of conserving personal energy, people are no longer willing to cooperate, and the process isn't documented. And the person got fed up with always having to laying it on thick. We will find out about it in a one-to-one meeting. Now leaders need to pay attention to things like microaggressions. What is a microaggression? It's not a less than aggression. Or like a small aggression. What is a microaggression? It's when a person allows themselves to make a comment or take an action. It might even sound like a compliment and may come with good intentions. But it targets a part of a person's identity. Let me give you an example. Oh wow, listen, if you hadn't said that your right eye doesn't see, I wouldn't have guessed. You actually look totally normal. I can barely see with my right eye, and when people find out, you know what they ask? So how do you put makeup on the other eye when your working eye is closed? That's a microaggression. Why? Chester Pierce, who introduced this concept in the 1970s, said it's death by 1,000 cuts. It's when a person hears it over and over and over again. Let me give you an example I witnessed. I became. It was when top management was discussing the question of who, which categories. Within companies, we need to be more attentive. Who do we need to better integrate? People, for example, who lost their homes due to shelling, or young men and women who have been discharged or demobilized from the Ukrainian armed forces. And one of the top managers made a comment. Oh, listen, we don't have that many of these demobilized people, and the world is right on them. It came together like a wedge, and I saw how one of the people present, her eye literally started twitching. Then a discussion started. Later, I have asked my contact person at that company, tell me, please, what percentage of your staff has been mobilized? She said, so far, we've practically not been affected by mobilization yet. I noticed Larissa reacted painfully, saying she has a husband serving in the armed forces of Ukraine. So that colleague's comment was a microaggression. He might not have known, might not have meant to offend Larissa specifically.
Or didn't think it through.
Or didn't think it through, but it's still a microaggression. And now Larissa definitely holds a grudge against him. And she'll be looking for opportunities to get back at him and poke him. A manager should pay attention to such behavior.
And how should this be addressed? Through a one-on-one with the person who showed aggression? Or maybe through a team discussion of certain issues that could be part of the overall culture?
All of the above, first, second, and third. It's about team discussions and colleagues too. Humor is when everyone finds it funny. Next, humor. When we attack a part of someone's identity, and here's another example from a client, a corporate party, we say something like, well, let's make sure no kids are born after the party. Ha 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 ha. And it might seem funny, but it's not funny to everyone. And that's a comment, a joke that, well, we should agree that, colleagues, we're all on edge, our sensitivity is different. Let's agree to be more considerate toward one another. That's the first point. Second, a person who feels that they've become the target of such a joke has the right to say, that was inappropriate, please. That's very hurtful. Has the right to say this directly during the meeting, to agree on it. Then agree that the person who just made such a comment that triggered a reaction like, that really hurt me, should not respond with something like, come on, You just don't know how to take a compliment. I was just joking. What happened to your sense of humor? Don't try to justify yourself. That's actually an additional form of aggression. In that line of reasoning, it's like saying, you're crazy, you're not okay. You didn't get it. Your humor detector isn't working right now, for example, right? And to agree that if someone tells you, hey, that was inappropriate and hurtful, the right reaction is to shut up. And then to talk like, listen, what exactly did I say that offended you? Sorry, I need to know so I don't step on the same rake again. And another option is not or, it's and. The manager should call in the person who said that and say, listen, do you remember that situation? Please don't do that again because, well, I know you didn't mean to make it worse. But this is what happened, so please accept it. Just accept it. It's important to maintain balance here. Because for a manager to turn into some kind of morality police, well, that's not a great role either. So you need to understand and choose your battles. Understand where you need to respond, like Petrenko, hey, wake up please. We're actually talking work here. Sometimes you need to do that, but other times you need to let it slide. It's about finding that balance. And what else should a manager be able to do under these circumstances? Be able to ethically and delicately suggest that someone seek help from a mental health professional. To a psychologist, a psychotherapist, or a psychiatrist.
That's quite difficult to do. A person might perceive it as aggression no matter what.
How can this be done? First of all, through your own experience. That's why I recommend all top managers and board members to gain personal experience. Colleagues, may I ask you an unethical question? Do you have experience seeing a psychologist or a psychotherapist? I do.
Oh, is that question for us?
Yes, that question is for us. Yes, that's why I started answering. I have that experience.
I don't.
My son and my husband have experience seeing a psychiatrist. It's not fatal. My husband, an IT specialist, didn't turn into a vegetable because of it. He wasn't prescribed medication for life. He was prescribed a pharmacological medicine at a certain point. But at that moment, it was important. My husband was showing symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder. That's not my diagnosis. A psychiatrist made that diagnosis. My son was showing symptoms of a depressive disorder, and this was even before the full-scale invasion. So when I recommend something to someone, I say that I destigmatize it through my own experience. I've gone to a psychotherapist. My husband went to a psychiatrist and received a prescription. It's not fatal, but it is important. What's scarier is dealing with the consequences of an untreated mental disorder.
Here, maybe it's not fatal, but it's also not shameful.
It's not shameful?
Oh, yes.
The main thing is to destigmatize it. When we ask companies, listen, do you have VHI, voluntary health insurance, and does it include psychotherapy services? We often hear it is included. Only 2% use it. And what do you think? How many need it? At least 10%. So HR gives us exactly the kind of information that general statistics reflect. Why don't people go? 2 reasons. First, it's stigmatized like, oh, if I go, that means, you said it. I was looking for another word. It means I've completely lost it. That's one form of stigmatization. And the second one is, there are people who are much worse off. What I mean? Do I even have a problem? In other words, downplaying their own issues. By the way, what are the signs that you should see a specialist? Let's recall Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And those basic needs, when I can't satisfy my basic needs, it affects me. The taste of life is lost. I don't get pleasure from the things I used to enjoy. I can't get proper sleep. Nothing brings me joy. Either I'm experiencing emotional burnout or I'm already showing symptoms. It has progressed into a mental disorder. That should already be a reason for me to seek help, at least from a psychologist.
In the organizations where we all work from time to time, we really do see manifestations of the emotional issues we've just discussed. And we have to address this as managers, most likely. And if we sum up today's conversation, what could we recommend to our viewers as the main takeaway from this discussion?
At first, managers at any level cannot provide treatment. Our role as leaders has not changed. We have not become psychotherapists or psychiatrists. That's the first point. That's why our task is to provide support in a way that doesn't make things worse. Support through timely communication, starting from communication of strategies to clear communication of tasks, expectations, and feedback. Next, if we are able to, we can conduct diagnostics, for example, surveys on employee engagement levels. Secondly, we monitor the indicators that are available to us. For instance, a dashboard on productivity. And we must be curious about what is affecting the indicators that, unfortunately, are declining. Next, we monitor the level of interaction within the team. If the number of unconstructive conflicts increases, if conflict proneness rises, we need to take a closer look at what's causing it. It could be that some of our processes have broken down, and I, as the manager, didn't notice that they needed to be fixed. Or maybe we need to find out how you're doing, what's going on with you, and understand what's behind it. What else can we add? The main task of a manager is by no means to put on the cape of a savior and act as a superhero. When an employee comes to us and they're in distress, because something isn't working, or it's like in film, the cast is coming off, the client is leaving, we're losing everything. It's very important not to say do 1, 2, 3, 4, because then we turn into a parental figure telling our little child what to do. We infantilize the employee. This creates a situation of learned helplessness, and the employee slips into the role of a child and becomes helpless. And in other matters, they also become helpless. Our task in such communication is to pull the other person into an adult position. So what's the problem? And what do we need to achieve? What do you think about this? Come on, if anything were possible, what would you do? These are coaching style questions. In other words, we engage the employee. We don't take on the role of a kindergarten teacher where we tell everyone what to do. That is something you absolutely must not do. And when we notice unusual behavior, we talk to the person. Outside of this operational leadership model, we arrange a one-on-one. And if we feel there's something to be concerned about, we very carefully and delicately suggest that the person, for example, seek advice from a psychologist. If the organization has the resources, we can also invite a psychologist to give a lecture, for instance. What symptoms should we pay attention to? Which symptoms don't go away on their own? Let me give an example. If there are symptoms like delusions, what's called bread in Russian, then it's necessary to see a psychiatrist, because that means the chemical balance in the brain is already seriously disrupted, and it needs to be addressed urgently. Another important point we haven't discussed yet is having a personal self-care plan. A manager should write a list of 5 to 7 items. What can I do that takes 5 to 10 minutes and helps me get into a resourceful state? For example, take a cup of tea and stand by the window to look outside. Shut yourself in a meeting room somewhere and sit for 5 minutes without seeing or talking to anyone. For me, for example, that gives me a bit of strength. Or go outside and walk briskly around the office. Muscles metabolize cortisol. There should be at least 5 to 7 such activities, and they should be integrated into your work schedule. As a manager, I have to do this for myself and encourage my employees to do the same. So tell me about your self-care plan. And also, make sure to send employees on vacation and not just stay at home and work. That won't count as being on vacation. You really have to make sure employees take at least some time off. But it's impossible to go anywhere. Doesn't matter. Figure something out.
There has to be a change of scenery and everything else. Oksana, you're understanding it correctly. What we're talking about now, the communications and everything else, these are standard leadership tools that should be used both in peacetime and during crises. We just have some additional symptoms now that we need to pay attention to.
You said it clearly. Absolutely right. The role of a leader hasn't changed. We have to do our job. Caring for people is actually part of a leader's responsibility. It's just that before COVID, we somehow did it more naturally.
Well, it was easier, there was less.
But when COVID hit, we realized that, people break down, people aren't all powerful. We need to pay attention to that. Thank God COVID came first, and only then did the full-scale war begin. If it had been the other way around?
It helped to ease into this smoothly.
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. To do your job, to consciously use traditional management tools, and to monitor a wider range of signs.
Well, yes, and if needed, then refer them to specialists.
To recommend?
Recommend, yes.
To send sounds as final.
To recommend.
Listen, you need to see a psychiatrist. I know for sure. The person definitely won't go, they'll get scared. And they'll start hiding things, sharing the bare minimum. And that's a psychologically unsafe situation. That's not what we're aiming for.
Oksana, thank you very much for your advice and the thoughts you shared with us and our listeners. Dmytro, thank you for your questions, your participation, and thoughts you have shared. Thank you all.
Thank you for the invitation. Please take care of yourselves, stay safe.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us in this episode. See you on the Boards of Directors with Sergiy Bulavin channel.